On September 10th, 2008, Keith Olbermann said, and I paraphrase slightly, "This is supposed to be a day of remembrance. Remembrance of the attack, remembrance of the national unity which followed it. Most importantly of all, remembrance of the dead." But instead, 9/11 has become a brand name, a Republican campaign slogan, propaganda of the lowest form. 9/11 has become 9/11 with a trademark logo. 9/11 TM sustained a president who should have been dismissed or impeached. It kept him and his gang of financial and constitutional crooks in office without literally any visible means of support. 9/11 TM made possible the greatest sleight of hand in our nation's history. The political party in office at the time of the attacks, at the local, state, and national levels, the party which uniformly ignored the warnings, and the presidential administration already through 20% of its first term and no longer wet behind the ears, have not only thus far escaped any blame for the malfeasance and neglect that allowed the attacks to occur, but that presidency and that party managed to make it seem as if the other political party would be solely and irredeemably responsible for any similar catastrophe in the future. Thus was Senator John McCain able to accomplish a further inversion of reality at his party's nominating convention in September 2008. There was the former mayor of the city of New York, the one who took no counterterrorism measure in his 7 years in office between the first attack on the World Trade Center and the second attack. Nothing except to insist, despite all advice and warning, that his emergency command center be moved directly into the World Trade Center. Yet there was this man, Rudy Giuliani, quite succinctly dismissed as a noun, a verb, and 9/11, and repudiated even by Republican voters, transformed into the keynote speaker at Senator McCain's convention. And his childish, squealing, braying, Tourette's-like repetition of 9/11 TM was greeted not as conclusive evidence that he is consumed by massive guilt, hard-earned guilt in fact, but rather as some kind of political tour de force, an endorsement of Senator McCain's vice presidential nominee, a rookie governor, a facile and slick con artist, the blind endorsing the bland to a chorus of 9/11 TM, 9/11 TM, 9/11 TM. Their ringing, mindless cheer of "We've kept you safe since then," while nobody asks, "Doesn't then count?" And yet, of course, the exact moment in which Senator McCain's Republicans showed the nation just how far they had fallen from the better angels of Mr. Lincoln's nature came the next night. The networks were told that the convention would pause early in the evening for a 9/11 tribute, and they were encouraged to broadcast that tribute. What we got was not a tribute to the dead of 9/11, nor even a tribute to the responders, or the singularity of purpose we all felt. The Republicans gave us sociological pornography, a virtual snuff film. Years ago, responsible networks, to the applause of the nation and the relief of its mental health authorities, voluntarily stopped showing the most graphic of the images of the World Trade Center, except with the strongest of warnings. And yet the Republicans at their convention, having virtually seized control of the cable news operations, showed the worst of it. It was terrifying. After all, its object was to terrify. Not to commemorate, not to call for unity, not to remember the dead, but to terrify. To open again the horrible wounds, to brand the skin of this nation with a message as hateful as the terrorists' own, that you must vote Republican or this will happen again and you will die. And just in case that was not enough, to also dishonestly and profanely conflate 9/11 with the 1979 Iran hostage crisis, to stoke the flames of paranoia about another Middle Eastern nation. This was a 9/11 tribute, not to the dead nor to the unity, but a tribute to how valuable 9/11 has been as a political tool for the Republican Party. 9/11 TM. End of paraphrase. So, what's changed in 10 years? One of the most significant changes would have to be that President Barack Obama has done in 2.5 years what President Bush apparently could not do in 8. Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of the attacks, was killed on May 1st, a date that is otherwise remembered as the time that President Bush stood on the USS Abraham Lincoln and prematurely declared mission accomplished in Iraq. A war that was justified by, among other things, 9/11. Which is part of the reason why I believe that, for all our talk of never forgetting what happened on 9/11, we have already forgotten what happened on 9/11 in many ways, and we have especially forgotten what happened after 9/11. A couple of years ago, one of my Facebook friends, who is unabashedly conservative, marked the date and then said, "Let's all be the people that we were on September 12th. "This is not a time for political bickering," said another. Be that as it may, when Keith Olbermann spoke 2 years ago about 9/11 TM, he meant that in the years since the attacks, 9/11 was used as justification for everything from Guantanamo Bay to the Iraq War, to waterboarding, to warrantless wiretapping, to presidential signing statements, to trying to get John McCain elected president, as we've already seen. But how often do we think about the people who died? Unfortunately, my answer to that question is not so much anymore, because we have been far too busy using 9/11 the way the Bush administration used it, as a political football, and not enough time remembering 9/11 for the tragic day that it was and still is in the minds of many people. So much for never forget. And there is yet another story of 9/11 to be told, one that I only found out about recently after my pastor used it in one of her sermons at my church. The lesson is in hospitality. On February 28, 2010, a blogger known as The Curmudgeon wrote, "When we think back to the events of 9/11, we typically recall several things. These items vary somewhat from one individual to another, but there are some fairly common features. We were stunned at seeing the World Trade Center struck by airliners hijacked by fanatical killers. We seethed with a violent, impotent rage. We tried to think of something, anything, that we could do to help those affected. We heard of carloads of volunteers from across the nation who went to New York, nurses, paramedics, relief workers, without waiting to be asked for help. We wept at others' staggering losses." Somewhere in that mix, if you think hard enough, you might recall hearing about all those incoming transatlantic flights that were diverted to Gander, Newfoundland, when the U.S. airspace system was shut down. You might even recall hearing about how the local residents opened their homes and their hearts to aid the stranded passengers and crews. Sadly, much of that story was overlooked or soon forgotten. In the myriad events of the time, most of us know very little about one of the more compelling stories to arise from the horror of the 9/11 attacks. A town of roughly 10,000 residents, 2 traffic lights, and exactly 1 4-lane roadway, Gander boasted a grand total of only a little over 500 hotel rooms. The good citizens of Gander and the surrounding area, notably Lewisport, somehow managed to see to the needs of nearly 7,000 stranded voyagers, and they did it with a rare style. They didn't have months to prepare, it just happened, as did pretty much everything else that happened on that fateful day, without warning. Their response was immediate, and it was as heartwarming and inspiring as any on record. For every traveler who needed a place to sleep, one was provided. No one was left wanting. Schools and community centers became improvised dormitories, with blankets, bedding, and pillows provided by the locals. Families traveling together were kept together, wherever they ended up. Special needs were met. Needed medications were provided. Kosher meals were arranged. Elderly passengers were placed in private residences, and a pregnant traveler was taken in by a family conveniently located immediately adjacent to a clinic. Other townspeople took empty-handed strangers into their homes as well. They fed them, they gave them clothing, they prayed with them, they wept with them, they consoled them. When they ran out, they got more. Lacking storage facilities for perishable goods, they improvised and temporarily turned the local ice skating rink into what one humorously described as the largest walk-in refrigerator in the country. Nearby merchants opened their shops to those who lacked basic necessities, and much of the merchandise was simply given away. They played the perfect hosts for 3 days, even becoming tour guides, entertaining their unexpected guests during the most trying of times. They furnished telephone service, email access, and televisions. They asked nothing in return. When showered with thanks and accolades, they seemed to shrug it off as simply the right thing to do. By the time the immediate crisis had ended and the plain people, as they come to be called, resumed their journeys, many enduring friendships had formed, the kind of friendships often spawn under the most adverse of circumstances. Some of the plain people in the years since have alternated between returning to visit their one-time hosts and playing host themselves to those who open their homes to strangers in need. And 2 previously unacquainted travelers, thrown together by adversity, found romance. They married shortly thereafter. When the plain people first arrived in Gander, they were told by a local official, "If there's anything you need, anything at all, just ask. It will be taken care of. Bottom line." It seems safe to say that claim was backed up. It's been said that there is no limit to the good that one man can do if he doesn't care who gets the credit. It seems safe to say that assertion receives some validation as well. End of quote. Today, I believe that 9/11 is now and will continue to be a test. A test not only of who we are as Americans to ourselves, but also who we are as Americans to other countries. Speaking in terms of how America has come to be seen around the world in the years since the attacks, the Reverend Adam Hamilton, author of Seeing Gray in a World of Black and White, has written, and again I paraphrase, "We speak and act and develop foreign policy as though we are the most important person at the table, and we do things expecting others to fall in behind. We somehow believe it is our right to do unto others what we want, not what we would have them do unto us. The United States often seems to other nations self-absorbed, hypocritical, and unwilling to play by the rules. This is not how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as generous and willing to sacrifice to help others around the world who are in need. We see ourselves as the champions of democracy and the protector of free people around the world. So, which image best fits us? The generous and selfless nation that stands for the poor and oppressed, and that pursues justice in all that we do? Or are we a nation that feels the world is ours to command, and that acts as though we are above the law? The truth is, we're a bit of both." End of paraphrase. And so I challenge all Americans watching this video, of all religious beliefs and political affiliations, wherever they may be, to seriously consider the question that I pose in the title. Today, we will remember 9/11, but which one? The 9/11 that so terrified us and for a brief period unified us, only to have that unification torn asunder several years later in the name of advancing a particular political agenda, or the 9/11 in which hospitality and generosity prevailed over fear and terror, where 7,000 strangers were taken care of by 10,000 other strangers who asked nothing in return. And as we consider which 9/11 to remember, so must we also consider what kind of nation we would like to be as a result of 9/11, now and in the future.